Chapter 3 More Than a Legend. In August of 1988, the Warden's Office in Waterton Lakes National Park received a report from Darwin J. Giles claiming that he, his girlfriend, along with a friend and his wife, saw an unidentified animal the night before. The report reads as follows. At approximately 12:50 a.m. at the Crandell Lake campground, we spotted a very unusual animal. We were sitting at our campfire when we heard some snorting. We assumed it was a deer, but upon further observation, we decided it was a bear and bolted for the cars. The animal was on its hind legs, and we switched on the headlights of one vehicle. From the shadows, I could see the animal was moving on its hind legs, so I called to the other vehicle to turn on their lights. What we saw then was incredible. This animal was not only on its hind legs, it was striding like human. We watched as it walked through the trees for at least 3 to 4 seconds. I immediately thought it was a joke. We're all convinced it was not a bear. We jumped into the vehicles and followed in its general direction. We came across another vehicle and flashed our lights. These people had also sighted something very strange and were quite scared. This confirmed that we had all seen something. It is important to note that we are 4 mature, responsible, and professional people. We thought very carefully before coming in to report this incident at the warden's office. All 4 of us are convinced that it was not a bear. I am equally convinced it was not a practical joke. If it was pretty elaborate and well done. From our sighting, the best description we can give is as follows. The animal was approximately 8 feet tall, as measured by the trees it was standing beside in our campsite. The animal was never on all 4s. When we switched on the headlights and got a good look, this thing was striding. It also had long arms which were swinging while it moved through the bush. It wasn't a bear, okay? I don't know what more I can write about this incident. We would appreciate hearing anything that might explain what we saw or additional sightings, if any. Darwin Giles. On the night of August 29th, 1988, Mrs. Susan Stones, the first member of the Giles party to sight the creature, responded to my newspaper ad for information on the Sasquatch. Susan told of the incident, which involved her husband Scott Stones, Darwin Giles, and Shannon Senko, while on a camping trip in the Crandell Lake campground located in Waterton Lakes National Park in the southwest corner of Alberta. We proceeded with the interview. On the evening of the sighting, the two couples were attempting to play a game of cards on a picnic table next to the fire pit by their campsite. The wind picked up, however, and blew the cards off the table, scattering them across the ground. At approximately 12:50 a.m., they gave up the game and decided to turn in for the night. Susan and Scott headed down a path towards the public washrooms to brush their teeth. Within moments, Susan was frightened by a noise. Scott, knowing his wife was afraid of being in the wilderness at night, paid no attention to her complaint, took her by the hand, and continued down the path. Then, at the same time, they both saw a strange creature standing on the trail 10 feet ahead. The animal made a low grunting noise. Susan yelled, "It's a bear!" tore away from Scott, ran back down the path towards their campsite. Darwin and Shannon, who had not yet left the fire pit, heard Susan yell, stood up and turned around in time to see her flying back down the path towards them. Panic struck. All 3 headed to the 2 cars. Shannon fled to one car while Darwin and Susan headed for the other vehicle. Meanwhile, Scott was still on the path, ever so slowly backing away from the creature. The creature moved off the trail and into the trees. Scott made it back to the campsite and ran for a car. He ended up in the same vehicle as Shannon. His wife would not open the car door to let him in. Darwin sat in the car with Susan, trying to keep her calm. Susan, shaking with fright, worried about other campers, wanted to lay on the car horn to wake and warn neighbors. Darwin stopped her. After a while, Darwin turned on the headlights. He saw nothing. Believing that the danger had passed, he rolled down the window and yelled for Scott, whose car was facing the opposite direction. Just then, an 8-foot-high, thin, hairy, ape-like man-like ape, creature strode into the area lit by the headlights. In 4 strides, it covered the distance illuminated by the lights, not running, just walking, at an incredibly fast pace. Its entire body was covered with black hair. Its arms were much longer than the arms of a human. In a matter of seconds, the creature had passed through the light and back to the trees, not to be seen again. It was then that Darwin and Scott knew what it was they had all just witnessed: the legendary, apparently fictional animal known as the Sasquatch. The two men wanted to get out and search for tracks, but Susan and Shannon were too shaken. They just wanted to pack it up and get out. After some insisting, however, a compromise was made, and the four campers drove around the area trying to spot the creature again. In their effort to get another glimpse of the creature, they came across a truckload of people who reported having seen something strange on the grounds an hour previously. The people in the truck did not give their names, and no further reports were heard about the incident from these people. After a night of relentless and occasional sleep from Giles' party, contacted the warden's office, who followed them back to the area of the sighting to search for tracks. The warden kept asking if there was a possibility that the creature had been a bear. Not one of the four witnesses were willing to concede to the bear story. In their words, it didn't look like a bear, it didn't walk like a bear, it didn't even resemble a bear. There was just no evidence to substantiate the creature being a bear. Susan coerced Darwin and Shannon to take part in the interview at her and Scott's home. Not surprisingly, the four witnesses had more questions to ask of me than I did of them. Each person was interviewed alone in a separate room and asked for their version of the sighting. Following are excerptions from the interviews conducted. Susan Stones. Question. Describe what you saw. Answer. I saw a creature first from about 10 feet away in the outskirts of the campsite, located approximately 15 miles outside of Waterton. My first reaction was that it was a bear. He grunted as we approached. He was standing on two legs and covered with black or dark brown hair. I would estimate the height to be 8 feet tall, in accordance to the height of the trees we later measured against. He was heavy, huge, maybe 600 to 800 pounds. His face was flat with eyes, nose, and a mouth. His arms were very long, and the tips of his fingers came very close to the knees. Question. How long in total did you see this creature? Answer. Approximately 1 to 2 minutes. Question. When you saw the creature, did it react in any way, and if so, exactly how? Answer. He grunted at us. Not seeming hostile or scared, I think. He was letting us know that he was there, almost like a warning. Question. In your own words, describe what happened. Answer. My husband held me by the hand as we started walking down the trail. I thought I heard something, and I told him, I think I hear something. He really didn't take notice of that because I always hear stuff. I'm kind of scared at night. We took a couple more steps, and then we saw a big, hairy creature standing up in front of us, probably 10 feet away. Then it grunted at us 3 times. Well, I screamed, "It's a bear," and ran to the car. Darwin got in the car with me, while Shannon ran into the other car. Scott, when he finally got to us, tried to get in the car with us, but I wouldn't open the door, so he ran to the other vehicle and jumped in with Shannon. The 2 cars were bumper to bumper, and when we put the headlights on and looked around, Darwin thought he saw something moving by the trail, or fire towards the trail. We yelled for Scott to turn on his headlights. About 10 seconds later, the creature walked into the light. It was walking on a ridge of about 30 to 50 feet in front of the headlights. It looked back at us but did not break its stride. It wasn't really fat like some of the pictures we've seen. In fact, it was slender with really long legs, disproportionate to the body. My husband yelled, "Holy, that's incredible, it's a Sasquatch." We drove around the campsite and came to another truck full of people flashing their lights at us. The 4 people in the cab of the truck listened to our story and claimed to have seen something similar about 20 minutes earlier. But they were quite drunk, and only 3 of the 4 actually saw it. When we got back to our campsite, I did not want to get out of the car or stay the night in that place. Scott got into the car with me and fell asleep. I stayed up all night and watched the trees. Darwin and Shannon stayed up all night too by the fire. The next morning, after much debate, we decided to report it to the warden. We went to his office and waited for him, told our story, and Darwin gave the report. The warden tried to convince us that what we had seen was a bear. He kept saying, "Well, bears stand up on their hind legs. Are you sure it wasn't a bear?" He was nice, but I think he thought we had seen a bear. Scott Stones. Question. When and where did the sighting take place? Answer. The incident occurred in Waterton Park, Crandell Lake Campground. It was the May long weekend, early, before 1 a.m. on Monday. Question. Could you describe the creature? Answer. It was walking on 2 legs. I never saw it go down on all 4s. Its hair was dark brown or black, and it blended into the darkness. I didn't actually see it until we got very close. The creature was between 7.5 and 8 feet tall and approximately 500 pounds. The second time I saw it, while in the car, I noticed its stride was about 5 feet. It moved very quickly through the beam of the headlights, keeping its legs almost straight. Question. Your wife mentioned that it made a noise. Could you describe the noise? Answer. The sound it made reminded me of that of a bull when it's in pursuit. I was chased by a bull once, and its sound it made is the closest I can come to describing this creature's noise. I did not think that any human could have made such a sound. It was like an animal with a big throat blowing a lot of air. Question. Once Darwin filed the report, the warden returned with you to look for tracks. What was found? Answer. Well, the area was very rocky and covered in moss. I think an elephant could have trampled through unnoticed. We did not find any tracks to substantiate the sighting, but considering the terrain, I am not surprised. Question. At which point did you believe this creature was a Sasquatch? Answer. The second time I saw it, I was pretty excited because I thought this must have been what everyone says is a Sasquatch. Both Darwin and I wanted to chase after it to see what it really was, but my wife wasn't too keen on the idea. Instead, we drove around a while. A big truck with 3 or 4 people in it in the front approached, flashing their lights at us. They asked if we had seen anything, so we described our creature and they described theirs. They also thought the creature was a Sasquatch. I don't think they saw it as well as we did, though. When we told the warden, he tried to convince us that our creature was a bear. Darwin Giles. Question. When and where did this incident occur? Answer. On May 23rd at 12:50 a.m., Site C3, Crandell Lake Campground, Waterton National Park. It was a typical campground with a circular gravel road. We were on an elevated site about 3 feet up from the main path. Question. How far were you from the creature? Answer. When I first saw it, I was roughly 20 to 30 yards away. Question. What do you think this animal was doing at the campsite? Answer. Initially, when Scott and Susan left the campground walking towards the creature, it grunted. They thought it was a deer and continued walking. Then it grunted again. I believe that the creature was just curious, and I'm convinced that it was watching us for quite a while. The reason being is when the cards blew off the table about 15 minutes before Scott and Susan saw the animal, I remember hearing something. I am convinced that it was just curiously watching us. Question. From what you remember, describe what happened that night. Answer. We were playing cards by the campfire, and Scott and Susan decided to turn it in. They started off down the path to brush their teeth. As soon as they walked out the campsite, we heard the first grunt, and I jumped up. Scott yelled back, "It's just a deer," and grabbed Susan by the hand, continuing down the path. Then this thing grunted again. This time, Susan said something like, "That's not a deer, it's a bear." As soon as Shannon and I heard that, we were up. Shannon suggested we move calmly towards the cars, but it was like a free-for-all. We sprinted. In the confusion, I ended up in the same car as Susan. Scott ended up in the other car with Shannon. Our car was facing inwards towards the bush and away from the direction of the first sighting. Susan was quite excited and wanted to honk the horn, but I stopped her and turned to look back in the direction of the bear. Then I saw a tall, skinny shadow. What is a bear doing on its hind legs, I thought. Usually they come down off their hind legs if they're standing up. I turned on the headlights but couldn't see anything, so I rolled down the window and yelled for Scott to turn on his. The 4 of us saw this thing plain as day. It was leaving our campsite, walking on an angle away from us, across the beam of the headlights and into the trees. There is no mistaking what we saw. Shannon Senko. Question. Can you remember what your initial reaction to the sighting of this creature was? Answer. Yes. I thought it was a bear, so I was scared and ran for the car. Question. When you finally did see this alleged bear, what did it look like? Answer. It was standing there covered in dark hair. It had very long and hairy arms and stood a good 7 or 8 feet tall. With the headlights of the car on, I saw it wasn't a bear. It took about 10 steps in a human-like gait and went on its way. 4 people saw something in the middle of the night far away from the city they lived in. Is it possible they could have seen a bear? Taking into consideration these 4 people are professional, intelligent careerists, I personally believe that it is ludicrous to assume that they do not know what a bear looks like. The only possibility of these people having not encountered a Sasquatch is that they were victims of a clever and well-prepared practical joke. The 4 people in a truck could have played such a prank and returned to the scene to see if their theatricals were effective. This is my opinion and the only other possibility, and giving consideration to the size, stride, and noise of the creature, the practical joke theory does not hold much weight. At the time of writing, I am trying to contact the warden who received this report and when looking for tracks in order to verify that no further evidence was found. The legend of Sasquatch, which began as an indigenous legend and mountain region folklore, has evolved into a serious mystery which is gaining in credibility by the day. In the eyes and ears of intellectuals, it is one thing to hear the distant tales told by distant people, but it is yet another matter to have these tales substantiated by another intellectuals who appear to have no personal gain in adding fact to what was once mere fantasy.